think, Marge. All I need is a title.
So, now we've come to the Book of Leviticus, which has to be one of the most boring books in the Bible. It's as though the Bible writers needed to take a commercial break from all the action that was included in the first two books. You know, sort of like, ooh, the fall of man, the worldwide flood of Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. God sends plagues to Egypt. Moses leads the Hebrews out of Egypt. The Red Sea parts. God then kills the Egyptian army. Moses goes up to Mount Sinai and receives the commandments. And now, a word from our sponsors. Because the next 12 or so chapters of Exodus and everything but a few bits of the book of Leviticus are taken up with various rules and regulations, laws and procedures on how to set up the priesthood, how to correctly do the various sacrifices to God, because if you do them wrong, He'll become angry and burn you alive. And then there are all the societal, moral, and cleanliness laws that were propagated throughout the entire book of Leviticus, like a plague of lowbrow moralist bitching. This was not some series of pronouncements from a highly advanced supreme being on how to run society, bring about the best good for the most people, be egalitarian to everyone, and give the supreme being his share of helping out the entire human race. This was a jealous, vengeful volcano god laying down his dictates to a largely illiterate band of forgetful people, which is probably why they needed the stone tablets. And they had better obey every letter of the orders being laid down, or their spiteful master will incinerate them to a crispy blackened char, unless they have the proper herd animal or bird that they can take to the priest. The priest then kills the animal and takes part of it for the sacrifice. Some of the other parts might be available for the priest and his family to eat, while the sacrifice itself is burned on an altar to provide, quote, a sweet savor unto the Lord, unquote. So here are the highlights of each chapter in the book of Leviticus. The first chapter starts off with instructions on how to prepare the sacrifices. Then there are details on meat offerings and which parts go to the priests. Chapter 3 deals with peace offerings, while Chapter 4 explains sins through ignorance, which, yes, folks, you can sin without knowing it at the time you do the deed. This chapter also covers nationwide sins, if the entire nation sins against God, which tends to happen quite often, as we will soon see. Chapter 5 addresses the sins of swearing or taking an oath, either good or bad, and sins involving the uncleanliness of man. Chapter 6 addresses lying and stealing and compensations for such things, as well as instructions on what parts of an offering can be eaten. This next chapter tackles a wide range of topics such as trespassing, thanksgiving, wave and heave offerings, as well as rules regarding exile and which parts of the offering can go to the priests. In Chapter 8, Moses and Aaron offer a sacrifice. Chapter 9 handles general sacrifices for the people. Unfortunately, two of Aaron's sons try to do an offering, but get the procedure wrong and God kills them. To add insult to injury, Aaron is told not to mourn, or God might kill him as well. In Chapter 11, we start getting into the legal rules. These chapters are done in the following format. God reaffirms that He is the Lord God of the people. He spells out the various rules regarding this or that, and then the applicable sacrifice is outlined, and most of the time it is reinforced that failure to conform to the laws is punishable by death or exile if you're lucky. And the sacrifice provides a sweet savor unto the Lord. So the following chapters cover food restrictions, menstrual and childbirth uncleanliness, lesions, leprosy, unclean houses, running sores, man's seed, eating blood, incest, child sacrifices to Molech, various social rules, handicapped people, contact with holy things, and specifically, there are rules in Chapter 18 forbidding homosexuality. Chapter 19 forbids mixing herd animals together and wearing clothing that uses mixed cloth. Chapter 25 continues the rules regarding slavery. Chapter 20 deals with the death penalty, and Leviticus 20:13 specifically prescribes the death penalty for homosexuals. Chapter 23 has more instructions on the Sabbath and sacrifices. Chapter 24 deals with blaspheming against God in an argument, and aside from loose ends, and Aaron possibly again incurring God's wrath in Chapter 16, that wraps up the book of Leviticus. Wait, what are the loose ends? Well, they're included as an afterthought, probably. Oh, okay. Chapters 19 and 25 has some good rules on how people in general should be treated, including a close parallel to the Golden Rule in Leviticus 19:18, love your neighbor as yourself, I am the Lord. Just to nail the points made in the rest of the book home, chapter 26 is spent giving a very short presentation on the rewards of obedience to God, but then it goes on a rant about the punishments for disobedience, which are quite extensive. After reading it, one could be forgiven for thinking that God had anger management issues while detailing this part of the book. However, in chapter 26, God also oversells the capabilities of his people, saying that 5 of them would be able to chase down 100, and 100 Hebrews would be able to defeat 10,000 people. The various enemies of the Hebrews appear to not have gotten these notes, as the biblical nation of Israel is later harassed by enemies like Egypt, Syria, the Philistines, Edom, Moab, and enemies further away, such as Assyria and Babylon. Leviticus 26, 7, and 8 must also be bitterly read by today's Jews, as they did nothing to deserve what happened to them in the 20th century, yet at least 6 million people were murdered by one of history's most brutal regimes. If Leviticus was true and relevant, that 6 million people should have been able to not only destroy Nazi Germany, but they would have been able to control the world. Well, that about wraps up our commentary on the book of Leviticus, but in a final remark, I must remind you that archaeologists have found no evidence that the character of Moses actually existed. This means that no God ever gave these laws to a non-existent man, and therefore they reflect not the rules and morals of an almighty supernatural being, but rather the social regulations of the people writing the book. This does not seem surprising to me, as God seems to agree completely with all of his followers. Or is that the other way around? In any case, the Judaic laws promulgated in the book of Leviticus are exactly the same sort of code of laws that you might expect from that part of the world, and in fact, not only does the Jesus of the New Testament uphold these laws and say that they should be followed every jot and tittle, but Islamic laws also include a lot of this same drivel, meaning that the mind rot spread over the centuries to infect almost everybody on the Arabian Peninsula. Instead, scholars believe that Leviticus was originally a series of laws passed around orally. Once the Hebrews were captured by the Babylonians, who were intent on protecting the trade routes through the areas of southwestern Arabia and into Egypt, those laws started to be written down. We will see what happens to the Hebrews after they leave the slopes of Mount Sinai as we explore the next book of the Bible, the Book of Numbers.